Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and this week we're going to have a look at fixing some of my runs. Alright guys, welcome back, and those of you who are new to the channel, this is the Alfarrari. This is my 1973 Alfa Romeo GTV that I have put a Ferrari 360 engine into. If you missed where we were last week, I'll put a link up above so you can catch up, and do think about subscribing. It really does help us out. So those of you who were watching last week will have seen that I actually spent a lot of time refining these wheel arch flares on both sides, front and rear, and getting them to be a really nice even fit, and sort of fix up a bunch of the little issues that I had with them. There were still a bunch of questions, and I think I'll just sort of cover over mostly. A lot of people were suggesting that I make a mould out of them, and I think I will actually make a mould out of them. I am not planning on selling them. I'll make a mould out of them for myself so I can potentially make sort of some replacements, and also just I can potentially do some carbon fibre ones or something like that later. Even though I do not plan on having bare carbon fibre flares on this, I don't think it suits the car at all. Another one of the big questions was, am I going to fit a gasket in here in the edges? And yes, I am. When I put it together, I'll probably use some sort of 3M double-sided tape or something like that in the edge. I don't really want to see. I don't want to have a one of those sort of clip-on rubber lines like you'd get on a Beetle or something like that, where you can sort of see a big black edge. I don't want that. I don't need that. I want a nice, neat finish, but there will be some sort of gasket to stop it from rubbing on the paint itself and wearing away, and having sort of potentially wearing it down to bare metal, creating rust issues and all that sort of stuff. There will be some sort of gasket, but I still didn't want to fudge it with the gasket, where a lot of the time with flares it doesn't have to be that good, because you just put the gasket in there and that fixes up any of the gaps. I wanted them to fit perfectly, and that's what they do now, so I am very happy with that. As far as them being different front to rear, this is actually what they used on these cars in period. There's a couple of different types. There's also the Gtam Flares, which basically bulge out the whole bottom of the car. And like I mentioned when I first chose these, I've never been a huge fan of those. I think they make the car look weird and sort of ruin the lines of the car, whereas this is sort of an extra, so you can still see the shape of the car, and I personally like them, and to be honest, that's what really matters. So yes, the flares are good, and I'm happy with the result. So now we can move back into the engine bay and start having a look at the mess that I made in there. All right, so those who saw me doing the paint job in the engine bay a couple of weeks ago will have seen that I showed you that I got a bunch of runs in it. The main reason for getting the runs in it is because I had to be reaching in from the outside. The light in my booth is not amazing to start with. It's fine for doing the outside of the car, but this is on the inside, and all the lights are on the outside of the booth. So inside the engine bay, and then when I'm leaning over and have my shadow in here, it really doesn't help. I do actually have a light that I've put on the end of the spray gun, but I find that it's very focused, and it's hard to actually still see the level of gloss that I've got coming out of the gun. Anyone who's actually sort of done some spray painting will sort of know what I'm talking about. But the challenge with spray painting, particularly when you get to the clear coat, is getting the balance between getting a nice gloss and getting runs. You don't want it too dry, or else you're going to get sort of a very sandpapery look, and it will not give you a very good finish. And you don't want it too wet, otherwise the paint will just sag and run. And that window is I find a lot easier with 2-pack than it is with acrylic paints that a lot of people used to use when they painted at home in the past. This is a much easier paint to get a good finish on. But yeah, leaning over and particularly doing all this engine bay all the way deep down into the bottom, it was just a very difficult thing to get right, and I got some runs. And it's not the first time I've ever got runs in paint. I am far from an expert painter, but I've done it before, and I've seen a few methods for getting runs out of paint, and I like the method that I use now the best out of all of them. So obviously when you've got some runs in paint, the first thing you can look at doing is just blocking them out. So getting a hard sanding block and sanding them out. The issue you get there is you generally will have the paint, which is a lump, and as you start trying to sand that lump out, you'll sand the edges down here as well, and you end up having this low spot you're trying to get rid of in the middle here. You gradually sand down this lump and sand down here, and you'll end up sanding through over here and still having a low spot in between. It's very difficult to block it out like that. I've seen another method where you can actually put body filler over the top of them and then sand it out. That's a whole lot of work. It's adding so much more sanding, and you're still potentially going to be sanding through over the edges outside where you put the body filler. So I'm not a huge fan of that either. My method, which I've used quite successfully in the past, is the razor blade method. So basically what I've got myself is I've got a razor blade, and I've just put a little bit of tape on either corner just so that I don't sort of gouge the corners into the paint. And you simply go to find your runs, and it works obviously best with the smaller runs. The bigger the run, the less chance of you having a good result. The big bubble on the end of the run can often still be sort of softer inside, and there's not a lot you can do about it. So I may end up having to repaint some of this engine bay. Probably if I do, it's only going to be the top part anyway, so it'll make it easier in the next run to not get runs in it. But let's see if the razor blade method works. And basically all I do is start running the razor blade and scratching it over the top of the run. And I'll zoom in here so you can have a look. So now you can see that worked very nicely, and those runs are gone. So that's my method of cutting runs out, and I've got a few to do, so I'm going to work my way around the engine bay and get it nice. And basically from this, I can then sand this and polish it, and it would come up $1,000,000, and you'd never know there was any runs there at all. So still see how we go. Some of the bigger runs are more difficult to cut out, and we'll see if they work as well, but we'll just keep cutting runs out. Okay, so going around and having a look, I've chopped out the runs pretty much everywhere around the car. There was little runs all over the place, and it came up pretty good, except for a couple of spots where I went through, which sometimes happens on the big runs, right on the edge there. That was an issue. And there was another one here where there was quite a large run that actually flicked up the layers of paint, which happens when it's too big. But overall, I'm happy enough that I will do another coat in this engine bay, but we'll just block it back. I can do a little repair on these things and get a nice even coat. And by painting just from sort of this level up, it should make it much easier to get a nice even coat over the car. All right, well, as you saw, I've scraped everything back. So now I'm going to go through and sand the top half of the engine bay back with 800 wet. I'm going to mask up the bits that I don't want to sand, or at least put just a masking tape edge just to sort of stop me from sanding too far, and then I can come back and sort of feather that out and stuff when I actually spray the clear. But yeah, let's start sanding. Yay! All right, so I've gone through everything sanded back. I've masked the edges of everything that I'm going to paint again. And another thing that I noticed that I do want to tackle is things like in the seam along here. If this will actually focus in the right spot, you can sort of see there's sort of ugly little corners that when the car was in primer, you didn't really notice, but now I notice. So I'm going to go round and put some seam sealer in some of those bits so that they are nice and tidy. So here I'm masking up either side of where I want to put the seam sealer to save getting the mess everywhere and just get it where I need it. All right, so now that I'm going to be painting parts of the engine bay, I don't want to have a really sharp, nasty edge from where the paint I paint up to a tape edge, and when you peel it off, you've got a very hard step. And the way that I get around that is I make a soft edge masking using regular masking tape, and basically what I do is I fold it over to, if I show you on a very short piece, basically what I do is fold it over so that there is a thin edge that is folded over. So when I stick it down, so when it's stuck down, there's sort of an edge that's not hard, so that the paint will sort of, some of overspray will sort of get underneath and you'll get this softer edge. So when you peel it off, you give it a light sand and buff it up and the edge will disappear. So obviously that was quite difficult to do it that way, just folding over one edge. But the way you actually, you can do it with the whole roll, is I get it started like so, and then stick it over my leg and make the edge like that all the way along. And I can make a nice long run. And then we have a nice long run of soft edge masking tape that I can now stick onto any of the edges I'm painting and have a nice edge that's not hard. All right, so I have the car all masked up. I have a couple of extra bits that I'm going to paint. This needs to be painted again. I have the engine bay all masked up, and it's going to be much easier this time just painting the top half. I don't have to paint the inside of the plenum that's back there. I don't have to paint all the way down in here. I just have to paint this top edge. The rest of it is not painted, so it should be much easier to get around. And I've added an extra light up here, which makes a huge difference to the inside of the engine bay. I should be able to see a lot better and get some good coverage in there. I think it should come out much better this time with a little bit of extra preparation. So time to go through and do other prep, like wet all the floors down. So I've got everything masked up. So time to wet the floor, so we should have minimal dust, if any, in this job. Let's fingers crossed. All right, so you see I got myself dressed into a spray suit this time, so it should keep the dust down. I've wet the floors. Now it's time to break out a tack rag, and basically I'm gonna go around and wipe down the entire engine bay and all of the bits I'm going to paint. And basically what this is a very lightly sticky cloth that'll pick up any dust and things like that. So we'll get stuck into that, then we can mix some paint up and start spraying the engine bay. And this time, no runs. Oh yeah, that is fantastic. This came out so much better the second time. It's all nice and glossy and shiny, and there's no runs, not a run. This engine bay is looking fantastic. The only bit is it's a little bit drier than I would like up in this area up in the back here, but it's really nothing terrible. That will buff up fine. It's just a little bit of orange peel, but the rest of it is all nice and glossy, shiny, and run free, which is exactly what I was looking for. So let's unmask it and see how the colour blends into the other places where I did the soft edge masking, and I'll show you how that comes up. So the joint I made was along that edge, and you really can't see it, even diagonally around here. You can just see a little bit here if this will focus. There's almost an imperceptible edge that's going to take very little in the way of buffing to actually make it blend, but it's joined in beautifully, and now we have a nice engine bay, particularly as you're really not going to see anything from sort of this level down. And it's going to be quite just a beautiful engine bay. The top part that I resprayed is actually the bit you see. All this stuff down here you don't actually see anyway, it all disappears. But I am very, very happy. You can actually see it a little bit here. That's one of the worst joints I have on the paint. And on this line here, where the soft edge didn't work quite as well, that's a harder line edge. And really, that's not a big deal. This was already sanded, and a very light buff here will bring that up, and you will never notice it. And that is under a cover anyway. So overall, much better. So true to my word, if it's worth doing twice, and that was worth doing twice. So hopefully I can take my time and do things better in the future on all the rest of it by wetting the floor, good tack rag, wearing the paint suit, and just taking my time, and it really does make a difference. So now it's time for the not so fun stuff of doing the final blocking down of the entire outside of the car, getting it ready for paint. So we did the high fill. High fill's been sitting for 3 weeks or something now. It's been sitting for quite a while. So now it's time to go over and just block the entire car back and get all of these lines and joins perfect. So for the first sanding on the primer, you don't actually need to guide coat it because you can see it, but it does make it easier. So I'm just going over everything now with 180 grit first, and then re-guide coating it and going back again over everything with 400 grit. All right, well, I've glossed over most of this. You've seen plenty of sanding in the last few weeks, but I went over the whole car with 180 grit and then went over it again with 400 grit. I still haven't done all of the edges. I've left the crisp lines and some of the little sort of nooks and crannies. I still have to go around and just fine tune that. But basically, the bulk of the entire car is now sanded back to 400 grit, ready to paint, and it's looking really good. It's nice and straight. I'm happy with the result. It was worth doing the second round of high fill primer just to make sure that everything's really good. Yes, I am very happy with how the engine bay turned out the second time. It's nice and bright and looking much cleaner and tidier without runs everywhere. So it's worth doing things twice if it comes to that. But I think I'm going to call it for this week. So I think that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, by 1983, Ferrari's road car sales were beginning to fall off due to greater competition and the excessive gentrification of the Ferrari lineup. So with the success of turbocharging in Formula One, Ferrari began to work on developing turbocharged technology for its road cars as well. Now the 288 GTO was born from the current 308 to save money on development costs, but in the end they actually shared very little. Now the engine was based on the 3 litre from the 308, but it was debored to 2.85 litres and run longitudinally, causing the wheelbase to be extended by 110 millimetres. The leftover boot space was used to house shopping. No, just kidding. Twin turbos and intercoolers. The track was also widened to accommodate much larger tyres, which were covered by bulging wheel arches. The body panels were all made from fiberglass, Kevlar or carbon fibre, besides of course the steel door panels, and this gave it a curb weight of 1,160 kilos, which incidentally is exactly the same as Harry. As the car was so fast, Ferrari decided to develop a race car version for Group B rally with the 288 GTO Evoluzione. This bumped the road car's power from 400 horsepower to 640 horsepower and also dropped its weight down to 940 kilos with a vastly improved aerodynamic body. Just 6 of these were built before Group B was cancelled for being too dangerous, but many of these styling cues were carried over to the later F40. In all, a total of 272 288 GTOs were built and remains to this day one of the most sought after Ferraris by the Ferrari purists.
All right, well,
we're chugging on.
If it's worth doing twice. And the engine bay is looking much neater this time with no runs. And obviously the Ferrari Formula One team has approved of my choice, and they've shown their approval by the current race, which when this video goes up should be a few hours after this video goes live.
Yeah.
They've gone with the yellow livery to show their backing of the Alfarrari's colour.
Absolutely. It's really heartening that they were watching, just waiting to unveil that, to support you in that way. So we thank you, kind sirs at Ferrari.
Yes.
And ladies.
So, anyway, yes, hopefully, with everything going well, next week I'll get some colour on the body, which would be absolutely fantastic. It's going to be so good to see this thing all yellow.
It's been a long road, as you know, if you've been watching the videos.
Yes.
Okay, please like and subscribe if you want to follow Jeff on his painting and sanding odyssey, which doesn't seem to ever end. And if you want to follow him with our ads, Patreon, always very appreciated. Please like, subscribe, and
all that stuff.
I hope you enjoy the videos.
And we'll...
because he enjoys making them.
See you next week.
Bye.
See you guys.
Hello.
We're all good.
I'm just thinking.
Just
a process.
Yeah.
The body panels, they were all made from carbon fibre, Kevlar or fibre carbon. The leftover boot space was used to house shopping. No, just kidding. Twin turbos and intercoolers.
Yes.